All right, installment number 5 of History of Anarchism. Let's talk a little about Voltairine de Cleyre and do a wrap-up. Voltairine de Cleyre was a feminist and an anarchist born in 1866 in Michigan. Came from a dirt-poor background and was educated, although her father named her for the great religious skeptic Voltaire. She was educated at a convent, and under the tutelage of the nuns came to be a radical anti-authoritarian. Very interesting life, actually. And she started out really as a religious skeptic, lecturing on Thomas Paine and others, what would have been called in the era a free thinker. Now, Voltairine described herself as an anarchist without adjectives, and she definitely emerged from the American individualist tradition I've been describing. She connected, actually throughout her life, she connected her work with that of Emerson and Thoreau, and I think that calling her a late-blooming transcendentalist is perfectly reasonable. I mean, you see this, for example, in her amazing essay, The Dominant Idea, but in many other places as well. But, you know, as the 1880s, 1890s rolled by, she came to be associated with the American anarchist movement of that era, which was really spearheaded by people like Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman, who were communist anarchists. And she had more and more sympathy for that, with that kind of view. And though she started out as very much a pacifist and an individualist and a defender of private property in the kind of Josiah Warren mode, she ended up as a revolutionary in the communist vein. So, you know, she went through a variety of different kinds of anarchism. Always describing herself as an anarchist without adjectives, as just a plain anarchist and someone who didn't want to plan out some kind of utopian future, but just let people go and see what happened. She was an amazingly intense moralist. One of her great essays is called Crime and Punishment, and it's an extraordinary anarchist treatment of those topics. And she asserts that criminals should not be punished at all, and you know, that's a hard pill to swallow, but she does, and I'll read you a passage from that essay, and it concerns Emerson, actually. A great ethical teacher once wrote words like unto these: "I have within me the capacity of every crime." Few, reading them, believed that he meant what he said. Most take it as the sententious utterance of one who, in an abandonment of generosity, wished to say something large and leveling. But I think he meant exactly what he said. I think that with all his purity, Emerson had within him the turbid stream of passion and desire. For all his hard-cut granite features, he knew the instincts of the weakling and the slave. For all the sweetness, the tenderness, and the nobility of his nature, he had the tiger and the jackal in his soul. I think that within every bit of human flesh and spirit that has ever crossed the enigma bridge of life, from the prehistoric racial morning until now, all crime and all virtue were germinal. Ask yourself, each of you, whether you are quite sure you have feeling enough, understanding enough, and have you suffered enough to be able to weigh and measure out another man's life or liberty, no matter what he has done. And I think, you know, we can see the connection of that kind of thought to this whole history that I'm describing. Again, you know, it's related to Christian ethics without God. I mean, Voltairine, definitely an atheist, and a beautiful writer too, as you see. And she put this into practice. I mean, actually, for one thing, she suffered greatly. She died at age 45, and she was terribly sick throughout her life. And at one point, she was shot by one of her former students who was apparently in love with her, I guess a kind of crazy stalker kind of guy. And she refused to press charges against him, and she sent an appeal to the anarchist press for funds for his defense. So, you know, she practiced what she preached along these lines. Let's, you know, that's where I'll leave the story of my kind of anarchism. We might talk about some later figures such as Randolph Bourne, John J. Chapman, and others, but I think we can leave the history there. Let me summarize this a little bit. Communist anarchism, first of all, owes much of its historic analysis to Marx. Much of it concerns class. It emerges with industrial capitalism, and it talks about the proletariat and so on. It talks about classes as agents of historical change, even though it does not accept Marxist authoritarianism. And in fact, it battled Marxist authoritarianism even within the worker movements of the late 19th century. Battled Marx himself, Proudhon and Bakunin, anarchists who opposed Marx in these movements and were sort of purged from these movements for their trouble. Communist anarchism, as the name implies, opposes the institution of private property. Now, my feeling is that, first of all, the use of classes, the exclusive emphasis on economics, the attribution of historical agency to classes, and the total opposition to private property, these are all, I think, problematic, at least from my point of view. These are views I reject. Not that there's no such thing as class or that you couldn't do something useful with class, but I think the exclusive emphasis on class in communism is quite unfortunate. And actually you see this qualified even in later Marxism, but you see it qualified very much in communist anarchists too. Still, I'm not that happy with the whole structure. In anarcho-capitalism and individualism of that variety, for example, again I might mention Ayn Rand, you know, you get this idea of this sort of Superman who is able to, you know, generate incredible wealth by, you know, his unbelievable industry and intelligence and so on. And you get very, I mean, I must say, similar to communism and arising at very much the same time, you get the basic idea that man is fundamentally an economic animal. That if you want to understand social change and you want to understand, you know, human life, you have to focus on economic transactions. And also the idea that everyone acts in a self-interested way, fundamentally that everyone is pursuing a maximization of their own wealth. These things strike me as totally implausible, and you know, that's not the kind of anarchism I want either. But it seems to me that the kind of anarchism that I'm describing, that I would associate with Emerson and Thoreau, with Warren, with elements of the Radical Reformation, with Rogers and Garrison, with Voltairine de Cleyre, avoids both of these extremes and is an incredibly generous and inspiring vision that is much more open ideologically and much more interesting and much more pluralistic than these other strands. So that's it, babies.